Now, not all of you can see, but I'm wearing Fringe today. And I'm wearing it because, well, ever since Yellowstone became popular on TV, it seems like you can't go to any corner without seeing a group of girls all wearing what they determine to be their Midwestern gear. And I'm talking about the streets of New York City. But rumor has it this is happening across the country. It's a fashion trend. And what are they honoring? They're honoring the women who shaped the West. Stories that I cannot even imagine how deep they go. So I am incredibly excited to be with our guest today, who is Lindsay Linton Buck. She's written the book on women shaping the West. So how much better do you get than that? And more specifically, stories that shaped Wyoming, which is where Yellowstone is, for its most part. So thank you very much. I can't wait to hear about these women because we certainly hear a lot about the cowboys, but not so much the women. So this is going to be fun. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you for wearing your fringe.
An honor of you. So, women of Wyoming, every time I looked at any episode of Yellowstone, I'll use that as my first frame of reference here for a lot of people, which is probably the first time they even thought of Wyoming. You think, how could they have done it? How did women go to an area that was not easy to get to, that was really remote, and yet spectacular, beautiful, and obviously forged lives?
Yeah, and it's still that way. In a lot of regards, Wyoming is the least populated state in the country. So we have just over 500,000 people, but we're the 10th largest in size. So what I write about in my book is that most of Wyoming is still very rural and wild. I live near the south entrance of Yellowstone. This year is a big migration time. So we have massive herds of elk coming through our town and property. And then, of course, when you're in Yellowstone, there's grizzly bears and bison and wolves. And this is just kind of our normal ecosystem, but it really does, you are very connected to the elements here, and the women that forged a path here, and the indigenous people that forged a path here for thousands of years. You do have to be quite tough and hardy. Our winter can last 6 months. You're very connected to the elements, and there can be an isolation that exists as well. We have this massive space that is very powerful, and I think living here, you get a lot of power from that, just like raw beauty of the landscape. But it can create some isolation too. So that was a big reason why I created my project, and my book was to create this web of connection across this very beautiful, but what can be an isolating place.
Now this might be coining my own word, which I'm really good at, a native Wyomington. So as a native Wyomington, you've had a family history there, correct?
Yeah, we usually say Wyomingite, but I'll take Wyomington as well.
Hey.
Yeah, my family, my father's side of the family, I'm fifth generation. They came here in the late 1800s, and most of my Linton family, they were business owners. They were very involved in community. I think that's a lot of where I get my passion to create an impact as well, but through the mediums that I know best, which is through art and media. My mom is from Connecticut, so she was really instrumental in exposing my brothers and I to a world outside of Wyoming. I grew up looking at stacks and stacks of National Geographic magazines as a child, which was really my first imprint and memory of just being fascinated by people and place and just this larger world around me. So while I have very deep roots in Wyoming, I never thought I would come home. I couldn't wait to leave. I lived in New York City and I lived in LA, and I just never imagined I would come home, especially as a creative, to my home state. And so another reason I created my book and my project was to sort of turn that limiting belief of what is possible in Wyoming for me as a creative to connect with my peers, other women. And it's been just an incredible adventure and quest, and just infinite wisdom and lessons gained as a result.
You really did come home in a pretty spectacular way. I
Mhm.
mean, the stories, the women you chose, the stories, the imagery, the portraits alone. I love to study portraits of people,
Mhm.
and because they're such storytellers right there. You know, someone's got a good scar on their face. I always want to know the story of it. And I'm not trying to be rude. I'm like, I just know there's a good story behind that scar. Kind of like mine right here. You have those.
Yeah.
And you tell the stories in so many ways, visually, sensually, in
Mm.
your book. How did this come about? Where was the impetus that you said, Lindsay, there's this great book in you?
Yeah. Well, the project, it really was born from when I came home and I had left and I'd lived in LA and New York. As I had mentioned, I'm a photographer by trade. So I was working as a photographer in New York City, portraits in particular, and came back and I opened up a portrait studio in Jackson, Wyoming, where I'm now based.
Time out. What brought you back?
What brought me back? I absolutely loved living in New York City. It was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I loved existing in a microcosm of the world. I loved being there as an artist and creative. It was, I think, the first time that I felt confident calling myself an artist when I lived in New York. No dream was too small. Everyone was going big. It was just such a powerful ecosystem to exist in. And I knew, I was like, this isn't where I'm going to really set down roots. Like, this is my training ground. And, I picked up so much in really a short amount of time. In a couple of years that I lived in New York, I had sort of reached my runway there. I was working for an amazing photographer, headshot photographer in New York City, Peter Hurley. And then I got a job teaching yeah, you might know him.
He shot my pictures.
Oh, great. That's great. Yeah, I learned so much from Peter. He, has a very, very successful portrait studio. And so I was his studio manager, and then I became his associate photographer. So I got some really hands-on shooting experience. And then I got a job teaching photography workshops for Canon. And it was a summer program where it was called Photography in the Parks. There were 7 professional photographers and videographers. And it was an amazing job. We got to live right in the national parks. So the Grand Canyon, Zion, Yellowstone, Estes National Park, Yosemite, Acadia in Maine. And we would bring an entire trailer with Canon's full equipment lineup. We'd set up in the park, and then we would just run free photography and video workshops to the public. And so,
how did I miss those? How cool.
No, I don't think after COVID and everything, I don't think they're happening anymore, but it was an incredible job for all of us who were working, because we just got to live in like the most beautiful parts of our country. And we just got to exist in like some of the most beautiful landscapes. And then we got to connect with people all over the country too. And we catered to whoever showed up. So if you were a really advanced professional photographer, we would cater to that level too. Say you've never even shot a point and shoot, we could help you with those introductory models. But when I got back to the city after that, Peter, he had to hire a new assistant, and I was kind of at that phase anyways, where I was like, I think I'm ready to go out on my own. And I think if I stay in New York, I need to plan to be here for about 10 years to get to where I want to be. What if I try going somewhere a little smaller scale? Maybe I can get there faster. I moved back to Wyoming, to Jackson, where my family is now based, thinking it would just be a transition. And Jackson's a pretty dynamic place. If you've ever been here, we're a big tourist destination. We have a pretty dynamic community, people from all around the world. And eventually just kind of questioned, why can't I try to do my work here? There are 7, I don't know how many real estate agents now, but at the time when I moved back, there were like 700 registered real estate agents. And I was like, well, I have this skill from shooting a more contemporary headshot in New York, no one's really offering that in our town. It was more wedding photographers, outdoor landscape photographers. So I thought I could have a little niche, and yeah, opened my business. And that's still like one of my main offerings and services here. And so the project really was born from, I do need a lot of learning and stimulation. And, that's why I love living in New York. That's why I love to travel and explore, and just, I do, like, I'm hungry for that constant learning. And so once my business was off the ground, I had that little bit of space to start thinking bigger again. Mm-hmm. And where I'm based in Wyoming, it's on the very western edge of the state. We're known as like a bubble and not necessarily representative of the rest of Wyoming. And I was just really curious, I'm sure you know all about that with your work. It's like, I didn't know what other women were doing in Wyoming. I wanted to just increase my network. And this project, it was a big vision. I'm not sure how you receive information, but just as a visual creator, first and foremost, when I get inspiration, is a vision. And so I could see this project, I could see the exhibit, and see the eventual book. Like, I could see kind of the full picture. And then it really just became like, okay, how do I do this and make it happen? And I talk about that with the creative process in the book, just having to start with 5 stories. That's what became really manageable, because I was still running my business, but I thought, I can tell 5 stories in a year. I was interviewing all the women and creating a podcast to, really create the audio record for their stories as well. The book, here she is. I brought a book. Did you get it, by the way?
Bring it in closer.
I'll bring one for you in New York if you haven't.
Beautiful.
So I always, like, creating this book was always part of that original vision, which was back in 2016, so over 10 years ago. But it had to wait. I launched my exhibit in 2019. I became a mom. And it was just something I had to put aside for a lot of years when I didn't have a lot of brain power.
I already know someone I need to buy a gift for, but I want you to sign it. So
I'll
send you the money so you can sign it and send it to me.
Yeah.
Because this book is spectacularly beautiful. I've just seen, some of the inside. You just did such a beautiful job. How did you choose the women, Lindsay?
Yeah. So those first five, it was a lot of just talking to people. Nell, who was one of the first women that I featured in the book. She's actually from New York originally, and she moved to Wyoming, and Wyoming became her home for most of her life. But I was meeting with a friend who worked in development. I needed to fundraise a lot for this project, and I was asking her how to ask for money, essentially, how to fundraise. And she said, have you heard about this woman painting 10 by 30 foot canvases from her ranch in Banner, Wyoming? And I thought, 10 by 30 foot, if you can imagine that's massive. She's not just painting from her elbow to her fingertips. It is a very physical creation process. I just thought, no, but I have to meet her. So it was a lot of these women who their names, they were these very like iconic, larger than life women, were those first 5. A lot of them were the first in their field. So Marilyn S. Kite, she was our first female Supreme Court justice, first female Chief Justice. Affie Ellis, she was our first Indigenous state senator. To Nell, who just overcame great personal odds and obstacles and painted at this massive scale. Mimi McConaughey, who was actually America's first Indian-born state senator in the country. So she was born in Madras, India, also came to Wyoming and has lived in Wyoming for over half a century, and just been an incredible community advocate for our state. And so, they were sort of these larger than life figures. So chapter 1 became breaking boundaries. I was also breaking my own boundaries, just having to stretch myself creatively. And so every chapter then, I created that 5-chapter format. Every chapter contrasted the previous chapter. So chapter 2 is called Filling the Void. And for that chapter, I did want to find women who were making a really incredible contribution, but maybe you hadn't heard of. Maybe they weren't as well known outside of their community. So I have Lynette St. Clair, She's on our reservation, on the Wind River Reservation. She's Eastern Shoshone. She's a linguist. She's preserving the Eastern Shoshone language. She's created a language app. At the time I met her, she was teaching at the school. Now she's consulting on TV shows. She consulted on Primeval and some other big TV sets and movies to ensure the Shoshone language is spoken accurately. To Lori Materi, I had this vision of a female pilot. I just think, I love Amelia Earhart, and Amelia had a lot of connection to Wyoming. And so I really wanted to find a female pilot. A Google search wasn't revealing anything. I pulled out a map of Wyoming. I noted where all the municipal airport symbols were around the state, started cold calling the list. And when I got to Upton, Wyoming, I found Lori Materi. She's the director of that small municipal airport, but her passion and joy is really flying into the backcountry. So her airplane has these massive tires because she loves to fly essentially into the wilderness. And her passion is so you can see just the tires. So this is Papa Charlie.
Wow.
Her loyal partner for adventure and discovery. And she serves on a task force to ensure that small rural runways, not just around the state of Wyoming, but all around the West, are preserved. And I also just really loved her story because she discovered flying in her midlife. She came from a flying family. Her father was a navigator in World War II. She's the youngest of 7 kids, so her family used to travel by plane to get places. But as the youngest, she was put in the luggage section of the plane. So she was terrified of flying all her life. And then when she moved back to Upton, where she's from, all these memories started coming back, but she was so afraid of flying. And she just eventually decided to face that fear. And now it's such an integral part of her life and joy and passion. So it's so important for me, for everyone's story. It's like, I think what they've been able to do with their life and their impact is really interesting. And I think the way they've gotten there is also really valuable. How they've just been, continue to honor themselves, face those fears, just step into themselves. I think it's a continuous lifelong process of unfolding, and we can have all these evolutions throughout our life. So I really was interested in teasing out and sharing that wisdom of all the different layers and processes of our journey. So each chapter became a way to contrast the next. I wanted to show a really diverse collection of stories. There's the oldest woman in my project at the time was 89, Mickey Tolman. When you talk about the face, yes, the face tells such a story. She's a rancher. Ranching is obviously significant to Wyoming's economy, but she's a sheep rancher. She's the matriarch of her ranch. She runs it with her 3 daughters. I got to join them at sheep camp, so I discovered her and called their family to see if I could feature her in the book. And they said, well, we're going to sheep camp in 2 weeks. Can you come with us? And 2 weeks later, I was staying in one of those sheep wagons, at the base of the pasture, and just, 1,000 sheep in the meadow, and just so many incredible moments and experiences that, just came about from really reaching out to strangers.
Wow. Now, did you write all these stories yourself? So,
yeah.
And you took the pictures?
Yes.
So you have proven you're creative beyond the camera, which is, I will not say just beyond the camera, because you take spectacular pictures.
Thank you.
And you're clearly, I always think of photography as good storytelling, but you added great stories in words.
Yeah. Well, I think I like telling all those layers. And as I said at the front of the call, my brain needs a lot. I think I can take those complexities and distill them into several different mediums. So I just knew with this project, I wanted to tell the stories, as well as I wanted you to really be able to go deep. The photo is really that window into their journey. So that, the podcast is a way where you can really get deep too. And probably for you too. I just think there's something so beautiful about hearing people's voices when you have these interviews, and it's a way of archiving. I was a history major in college, so I love, I truly believe in the power of and the value of we have to record and preserve stories. That's how we show the value of humanity. So that's a big reason of why I created this book. And so, yes, it's the visual record, but it's also the audio record. It's also the written record. And I think all those layers deepen the way that you can experience
How
the
many
impact of the way
times,
these works.
how many times during your interviews did you hear the word, well, that's off the record?
You know, I only had a couple people who felt a little more uncomfortable sharing their story.
Yeah.
And it was because they had gone through some major life transitions and they were with me kind of resharing their story for the first time. So they felt vulnerable, rightly so. And they had maybe existed in a certain space before and then intentionally became a little more private. And then I was asking them to re-expose themselves. And that is uncomfortable. It's interesting creating the book, actually, even though so many of these stories were created, 8 to 10 years ago. And they've been out in the open. They've been in the public. My exhibit that goes with this body of work has been touring since 2019. It's toured 8 venues in that time frame. So, I've exposed myself with this work for a very long time. But when it came to writing the book, it brought up so much fear. And I actually thought about those women in my project, like, wow, they really trusted me and they had to kind of overcome that hesitation and that fear of exposing ourselves. And I kind of pulled from their example, like they still move forward and they still shared their story. And I just had to go through a lot of that with the writing process. I think the writing process compared to, say, the photography process, very internal. I think from being in front of the camera, it's an external production. You're interacting with a person. It's social.
But it's social. But a really good photographer draws out that laugh, that moment when you think you're going to cry, that moment. A good photographer. I mean, there was a time when I used to think, oh, anybody could take a picture. No, anyone cannot. And a good photographer notices a zillion things, but they can bring out personality.
Yeah. You're reading energy, right? You're feeling the energy. Like Peter used to joke that he is 90% therapist because it is also an exposure that you're asking your subject to, how you're asking them to present themselves and reveal themselves.
Yeah.
So yes, it's similar. It's like almost like I had to go through that process with the writing process. Like you have to expose yourself. And it was honestly just surprising. I was like, I can't believe this much fear is coming up because it's not like I'm necessarily saying anything new that I haven't said, though the book is more personal. It is more intimate. I share more of my story. And there's a permanence. Like there's a permanence to a book. Like it's like this physical object and it's carrying all the stories and that frequency. And also like, it's just a different world now than when I created the project 10 years ago. So it was more, I just had to like recognize that fear and figure out how to keep moving forward.
What did you tell yourself when you felt that fear? What were the things you did to keep yourself moving forward?
Yeah, so many things.
They don't finish.
I have a lot, I think I'm very big into not repressing emotion. I think we have a big issue with that collectively, and we are expressive beings and our emotions are very helpful. And so I did not suppress that fear. It was more, it was surprising. It was very strong. But I try to get really curious about it and look at where is this coming from? Also, I think it's important with fear, like our nervous systems, our bodies are wired to keep us safe. So it's like, well, this is something new you're doing. That's scary. Let's keep you safe. And it's like, I am safe, right? Like this isn't like the worst thing someone's going to happen with a book is they're not going to like it, right? Like they might write a critical review. And so I think it's important when you experience fear to really dissect it and determine, like, is this fear going to harm me, or is this just, entering new terrain? But I do have a really strong journaling practice where I like to get inquisitive with that fear. Movement is really important to me. I was a dancer long before I was a photographer. So I do feel things very strongly. I'm a very perceptive person energetically. So like, I like literally have to like physically move and like work it out of my body. But I also like to get curious about it. And
Over what period of time from start to finish?
For the project?
Yeah.
I officially started the project in 2016 with Nell G's story. She was the abstract expressionist painter. And most of the production happened in a very short period of time from 2016 to 2019. The cover girl, Jessie Allen Gottwald, this was taken in June 2019. I was 4 months pregnant at the time. She operates the highest elevation guest ranch in Wyoming.
How did that feel pregnant? Oh my God.
I write about it in the book. There's 3 behind the scenes stories in the book where I take you to that moment of production. And I write about how, it was the very last story before my exhibit opened 4 months later. So there was this pressure of this huge deadline to meet. But we couldn't access her ranch any sooner because it's Wyoming and it's buried in snow until, we still get snow in May and June at some points. So we got to the ranch as early as we could, which was mid-June. I was 4 months pregnant. I was pretty tired. Excuse me. And we wanted to capture beautiful light. So we were up at dark. I was up at 4 a.m. so that we could meet the sunrise. And it was all, kind of pushing through a lot of discomfort. But the result, the magic of, when she's packing her horses up the hillside and it's just like vast, untouched terrain beyond her. A full moon was setting. It's like all of that discomfort alchemized into something just powerfully electric. And, I feel like it's like when you put that effort in, you get the reward. But yeah, it's pushing through the discomfort of sometimes actually
altitude and pregnancy. Wow.
Yeah. Being able to meet that moment. So
I'm curious, you called up these women, you didn't necessarily know them. Hi, I'd like to interview you and take your picture. What was that ask like? And what was the initial response for most of your?
Yeah. I mean, it was really honestly wonderful. Everybody that I asked to be in the project said yes. I do think that's a testament to our state. We are very small scale. I think when you live even though we're all isolated from each other, there's usually not a big degree of separation if you're trying to get in touch with someone. So I would always try to get like a personal introduction to somebody if I could, and I could typically find that. And I think too, a lot of the women, they really did want me to succeed. The export of Wyoming young people is significant. My story of not wanting to come home is very common. A lot of people leave to pursue opportunities elsewhere. So I think anytime you have somebody trying to come home and make a life for themselves, people want to support that. So I felt very, very mentored and supported by all of these women. And there were instances where, like with the podcast, I interviewed Marilyn Kite. And at the time, that was at the very beginning of the project. She's our first female Supreme Court justice. I only had one microphone. So we were having this conversation and you couldn't hear me. So it's just like her speaking to, herself essentially. And I couldn't use the interview, obviously. And at the time, that's like a larger story too of not necessarily believing that my story and like me being in the mix of these interviews mattered. So one of my journalism professors from when I got my photography degree was like, gave me permission essentially. Like, yes, you can record yourself. Like, this is a conversation. We want to hear from you too. But when I had to go back to her and just ask, can we re-record the interview, it was, of course. And there were times even with the photographs, because I shot all medium format film. So you're not getting that instant gratification. you're not, I don't
Oh,
know if you've got it. And I wasn't doing.
you're brave. You
Yeah.
are a Wyomingite.
Yeah, I didn't, my commercial
Shot
work.
in film, all these women. Wow. No
Yeah.
B plan? No B plan on the digital?
No, I was
Woo!
like, because my commercial work is very produced. I have my makeup artist. I shoot tethered into my big computer, and I spend a lot of time editing. And with this, I was like, I need it to be fun. I want it to be fun. I don't want to edit. I don't want to add all these hours staring at a screen. And film is gorgeous. Like, it comes back and it looks
It's
like
so unique. Now
you
that
have to touch out some dust spots.
Yeah.
But it has that, it's physical.
Yeah.
And, so much of this project is also this love letter to the land and this place that is physical and tangible and raw and real. And so I felt medium format film really complemented this place that we're existing in and trying to forge away. And I knew I wanted to create this exhibit with a medium format film negative. You can rescan that and print large scale. I knew I wanted to print large scale for my exhibit. The prints are 40 by 54 inches. So they're quite large, and we get a really beautiful product as a result of that. But there were a couple times where I had to go back and just say, can we do one more shoot? I just need to add a little more to your story. And everyone was very gracious. And, but yeah, it was a risk. It was a risk when I was that first story with Nell, who was the abstract expressionist painter. She sadly passed away in 2021. She lived 7 hours on the other side of the state one way. And she was the very first person that I worked with for my project. And so, I'm driving 7 hours across the state. I had packed up my entire photo studio, every light, every modifier, every backdrop. And luckily with her, because she was in her 80s when I worked with her, she was a full-time artist. So I spent like 2 full days with her on her ranch. And, working with another artist and creator for the very first story, it was very collaborative, and we co-created together. And she was just so game to try anything. And I did. I set up my backdrops and we tried every lighting style. And, but as I was leaving, I was just like, I hope I got it. I hope I got it. But we did. And we got some of the most magical photos. I'll just show you one of my favorite photos. And this is a really beautiful in the exhibit too. It's a triptych. So it's 3 in the exhibit. These are standalone. It's 3 separate portraits, but you'll see she just totally blends in with her paintings.
Yeah. Spectacular.
But you can see.
Yeah. She looks like she's one with the painting.
The life on her face.
Yes, absolutely alert and looks like one with the painting. I love them. I love this.
That's just how it comes out too. I'm just like, so it was magical. It's like the whole creation was just magical. And anytime I would get those scans back, it was just such a gift. And
Lindsay, what did you learn about yourself through this process?
I mean, it's honestly been, it is like the gift that keeps on giving. If you would have told me 10 years ago when I started this project, like, I'm still going to be sharing it with people. I mean, that would have been crazy to me. Even though I had this big vision, it was still, no one was making me do this project. I've just been incredibly devoted to it for over a decade now. And it's, I don't know, at times, honestly, it's been like a lifeline to me. When I had my boys, when I became a mom, I had them 18 months apart. I have 2 boys. Going from 1 to 2 was really challenging for me. I had.
It's not 1 + 1 anymore.
No.
It's the inmates in the asylum.
Yeah. It was really, I really struggled. I had peripartum depression and then postpartum anxiety, and was just really in survival mode for a couple of years. My exhibit was still touring, and I would go to these openings and just like have these moments where I could remember who I was before, or just, who I still was, and in addition to being a mother now, because it's such a huge identity shift. And I felt so disconnected from myself for a lot of those early years. And so the project was just like this gentle reminder of like the powerful creator inside of me, and but also the connectivity. Just I truly do love and respect all the women in my project. There's 25 stories, but it's opened up just this massive web of connections beyond that. And
you said something earlier that really caught my attention, and I want to come back to it because I think that could be where you're going. You said, all of the women, I felt like they really wanted me to succeed.
Yeah. It is collective. It is this collective effort. And I do actually think that's what motherhood has taught me too. I think before I became a mom, very good at operating solo, very high functioning. And then it was like, oh, wait, I can't do this all on my own anymore. I need the village. I need my sisters. I need the sisterhood. It's so vital. I think what women do so well is create that interdependence. And it's just become more valuable to me, I guess I should say. Like the older I get, it's become more valuable. And I'm just so rich in relationship and experience. I feel like the experiences, the memories, the conversations, the wisdom, these are things that no one can ever take away from me. They get to live within me, and I get to share them, continue to share them with others. Like that's such an incredible gift and blessing. And it continues to surprise me. And I think that's the coolest part about the creative process are the surprises. It's like you are going to hit those walls and barriers, whether it's logistical obstacles or fear. And there's a lot of reasons not to, it like doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. Like why go travel 14 hours round trip and shoot film and talk to strangers? Like, why do that? Like logically, it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's all of the incredible, it's how rich in your life becomes as a result. And then the ripple effects of connectivity you can create as a result. And I think that is what, especially in this moment we're living in, which is quite destructive. I feel like it's so vital to feel that interdependence and just to be reminded, like with these women and just the network as a result. It's like there's so many people doing incredible things in the world. And that is what this project taught me over and over again. Like if you just start looking, if you can widen your scope a bit to receive and just explore, there's so much good. And that's what I got to explore. And that's the space I get to exist in with this project.
So I'd love you to expand on that as we come close to a wrap. If you were to say to someone, if someone said, Lindsay, I have this idea, but how would you complete that sentence for them?
Well, I would challenge the but. I would challenge the but. And it's a great place to start, actually. I would say to surrender to the moment you are in right now. If you are in a moment where you do have a little energy, but maybe there's some logistical issues, you need to raise money, you need more time, like those are things that maybe can be solved. And so it's very individual, right? I do feel like this project has followed me throughout so many moments in life. There was a period in that early motherhood period where I really did have to surrender. It was like, I can't be in producer mode. Like I need to surrender to self-care and building support. But even that is a process of creating flow. Like maybe you're just in a phase where you need to do less and you need to support yourself. And what does that look like? Right now I get to be in a moment where I get to share these books again. And I'm in kind of this reinvention with my work and my business where, as a creator in motherhood, and I'm completely reinventing my business model. And I've kind of given myself this whole year as like my pivot year to explore new avenues. Creating the book for me, I was like, oh, I definitely want to create more books. I want to create more records. And so it's looking at how I can combine kind of art and commerce and create this more as my business model. So I guess I would just say to challenge the story you're telling yourself. Ask yourself, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's essentially how I started the project. I'd held this belief of Wyoming is limiting. Mm-hmm. I can't do anything here creatively. And after a while, I was like, that isn't really serving me. Is that true? Mm-hmm. And there was, I believed like mostly yes, but there was a little bit of space where I was like, I can't prove that 100%. So but it was that like maybe 10% that I was like, let's explore that 10%. And that is the birth of my project of saying, okay, well then let's see what's out there. Let's see what other women are creating and forging and how they are working within this landscape and finding a way to express themselves fully. So I think it's really very powerful.
Now I have a question. You did say an economic question, because you did say at some point you raised money for this project. Did you raise money from patrons or did you do it as shareholders?
Patrons for this project, for the production and for the exhibit. I partnered with a couple of nonprofits, which is a fairly standard model for artists. It's called a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. So that opened up grants and funding from foundations. And yeah, so because, you know, really up until the book point, the book was separate from that, obviously, but the funding of the stories and the exhibit, even the exhibit, it stays together. It is kind of like an educational piece. So now I'm, you know, for the next project, I might do it a little differently where you know, that may not be the model I continue moving forward, just creatively, but yeah, that's how I funded it originally.
And did you know, I love when you said you want to create books because they're records. That's why I love books. I want to see books preserved, because you can't go in and just alter it online and change the story. It's the story, it's the snapshot, it's what it was. Which also, going back to something you said earlier, is why sometimes, you know, I could write something and I'll write it and edit it and edit it and edit it and edit it. Whereas a podcast, it's like, oh, this is what I said. This is it. I'm going with it. You know, it's live. But I have a question. Did you know you were going to do an exhibit when you did the book, or did the book come first and then the exhibit was in the aftermath? How did that unfold?
Sorry, my cough. The exhibit came first, and it wasn't necessarily intentional, though. Obviously you do need all the stories completed for the book. The way the exhibit came about was I had this vision for an exhibit. I also love experiencing photography and art in person at venues. So I knew I always wanted to create that with this body of work, was create a traveling show. And there's an incredible museum near where I grew up in Powell. It's called the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. It's Wyoming's only Smithsonian accredited museum. There's 5 museums under one roof. It's this really monumental, beautiful space. And when I was in production for chapter 1, so, you know, I was just starting with the stories. I don't even know if I had told Nell G's story yet. I connected with a curator at that venue and just asked, you know, how do I get a show here? I'm going to be producing this project. And they told me that, and this is very common from what I've learned working with a lot of institutions now, is they need a completed body of work. And then it's about 2 years to get on their calendar. Like their exhibits, they plan out that far ahead. And I just thought, like, wow, that's like 10 years out for me, you know, until I'm going to be done. And then another 2 years. And so luckily, the way I produced the project was those 5 stories at a time. I built a website, I had the podcast. And so a year later, in the fall of 2017, I launched those first 5 stories. They were available online. They were photo essays and the portraits. And I sent that curator a link and I just said, is there any way you would consider an exhibition while I'm still in production? They said, is there any way you could consider the fall of 2019? And obviously was overjoyed and said yes. then I had a hard deadline, right? I was like, okay, I have 2 years to get to this exhibit deadline. I knew I always wanted to tell 25 stories because it's 5 chapters, 5 stories each. I got to 22 for the exhibit opening. Jesse's was the last one that I could tell because I was also pregnant with my first son. That exhibit opened in the fall of 2019. I had my son in December. Then I had my second son in June of 2021. I finished the final 3 stories after I had my second son. So then I had 25, and I did try to create the book shortly after that. I was talking to some agents and talking to some other authors, and it just wasn't sticking. And I actually let it go. I was like, okay, I was also very, very sleep deprived. Very sleep deprived.
Those days.
And I was just like, maybe the book, I've created the 25 stories. I have this platform. I have the exhibit. Like, that's enough. That's enough. And I wanted to do the book, but maybe it's just not going to happen. And I let it go. And a couple of years later, starting in 2024. So my boys were, they're still pretty young. My oldest is almost 6.5. Lukey's almost 5. So they're still very young. They were like 3 and 4 when I started the book process. But postpartum, that's still a huge difference, just getting to those ages. And so in 2024, the book came back around. And for me, it's, as I mentioned before, like I either get the vision where I can literally see what I need to create, or I just have this knowing where it's just very calm and it's just like, okay, yep, now it's time. And that's what it was for the book, where it's like, now it's time. And it felt like this window in this moment where it's like, now's the time to do the book. So go. And I'm really glad I waited, because the book was definitely, it took about 2 years from that initial knowing to getting the final product. Very, very intense at times, to be able to show up for that and meet deadlines. And I don't think I could have done it if I would have done it right on the heels of those early years of motherhood. And I also think it just gave me more time to settle in, post having my kids and becoming a mom, and just, I just believe every creation has its own timing, if you listen. And I feel like this is the time to be sharing these stories, and also where I can show up to honor them and share them. And I don't think I could have necessarily in those early years.
Oh my gosh, these interviews go too fast. I have been speaking with Lindsay Linton Buck, and she is the author of Women Shaping the West, Stories from Wyoming. And I can only tell you, the book is spectacular. The stories are wonderful. This is a great gift. It belongs on every coffee table. Anyone would love to look through this book. Lindsay has shared incredible insights. There are so many good sound bites from this. I'm going to have a lot of fun clipping this episode. I know for sure. And Lindsay, I really want to thank you. Lindsay and I are going to move over to the green room any minute. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Diane. That did go by incredibly quickly.
It sure did. There'll be all kinds of clicks below, links where you can find Lindsay and learn more about her work. And please, there's the book again. Please do order this book. It's a great gift for yourself or someone else. So I'm Dian Griesel. I'm also known as Silver Disobedience. This is the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. And I hope you hit subscribe and share this with your friends. Thanks a lot for joining me. Stay tuned till next time.